All right, welcome everyone to our town hall meeting in association with our one service for Turtle Island. If you would allow me, I'd like to say good afternoon to you and then offer prayer, and we will get into our work for this afternoon. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Holy One, we ask you to enter our hearts and to heal our brokenness. Your love is overflowing in our moments of grief and desolation. When the world seems to go astray and our human abilities fail, we rely on your compassion to offer amazing grace, the grace that surpasses our human understanding. Through scriptures, we remember our friend Jesus, who comforts the afflicted and heals the brokenhearted, and we pray that you would heal us from all our embittered feelings. Holy One, we ask that you clean our bloodstains of distrust and free us from all iniquities. May we regain the vision of your reign of peace, hope, and love that you instilled in our being since the time we were conceived in our mother's womb. When our human knowledge and skills to unite fail, grant us your wisdom to imagine and dream new ways to usher your reign here on earth. Finally, we ask that you give us grace, enough grace to see you in all our siblings and in all our human experiences. As we gather today, help us be bold, clear, and compassionate. And on this day, and as we walk together in the days that come, renew your gentle spirit, the spirit and practice of compassionate wondering within us, and enable us to follow your humble path on earth. These things we ask in the name of Jesus Christ, our healer and redeemer. Amen. I would like to acknowledge that I'm standing now on the unceded ancestral land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. And I honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. Today, my job is to MC and to serve as chaplain. So what I'm hoping is that I will talk for a little bit and never talk again after this, and that we'll listen to the people that we came to listen and learn from today, because I'm going to be listening and learning with you. But I want to give you some technical information, and I invite my panelists cohorts to jump in if they see me making a mistake or if there's more that needs to be said. I do want to tell all of you that have joined us that we already know there were over 1,000 links linked into the service today. And I just want to thank especially all the people that sent music. I don't know about you, but I was just truly astounded, amazed, inspired. Great amen to all of you. I mean, Trinity Everett, the Hallelujah Chorus, that was unbelievable. It's truly amazing. But all of you, thank you for doing that. So here's how this is going to work. Now, please listen, because people tend to not listen to this and then they wonder what to do when it actually falls on them that they want to do this, which is ask a question or you have technical issues. Here's how we're going to do it. If you have a question for the panelist, you ask that in Q&A. So you might find your Q&A button. That's the way you pose a question to the panelists that are leading us today. You do that in Q&A. If you have other questions or comments about the webinar, about technology, about problems you're having behind the scenes, put that in chat. So Q&A for questions for the panelists, and chat for everything else that may be a need that you have. Chat is visible to our host, but not to everyone else. So unlike some of the Zoom meetings, you can't chat with one another. And we did that on purpose so that you can pay attention to what we're doing today. But if you need to chat with a host, if you need to let us know something, please put it in chat and we will be monitoring that and looking for it. All right, the panelists are not going to be looking at or responding to either chat or Q&A directly. One thing I'm going to try to do is facilitate the questions to the panelists so that they don't have to monitor all of that. And we've got people doing that. So that's how we'll get the questions in. Some questions will be answered in writing. and some will be answered verbally. So I also want to be clear about this, that as in all learning, any question is okay. This topic is not an easy one for everyone to talk about, and not one to have confidence in always. But the way we will have a real conversation, real movement on this, is to ask the questions that truly are questions for us and within us. So we encourage you to do that. Now, what we are going to be monitoring is we're going to be watching for any personal attacks or comments directed to panelists that are inappropriate, and any questions or comments that disparage any of the people or cultures that are represented. But we're going to monitor that, and we reserve the right to ask you to leave or make you leave if that's the case. We do not want to, however, tamp down your courage in asking the real question that you might have, and I hope you'll do that. Let's see. I do want to say, if you need the interpreters, you can pin or spotlight them yourselves. And if you just try that, if it's not working, try it again. But you can do that yourself, and we hope you'll do it. If you're having problems with that, you can, again, put that in chat, and someone is there to help you and try to walk you through it. I want to thank, I'll probably do this again, but I just, at the risk of forgetting or not getting it done, I want to thank the Circles of Color who put amazing amounts of work into this. And we all were blessed by that work today in so many ways. For our tech team at the Diocesan House, Josh, Carrie, Greg, April, Matt, and Tanya, who also have worked tirelessly behind the scene. For Alissa Newton, who on the staff, who's also done that, and many, many others have as well. But I definitely do want to thank them. And so at this point, I think I'm going to ask Rachel, on behalf of the Circles of Color, if she would like to make a statement. And then I would hope that the panelists would introduce themselves to you today, and they can take it away and we can get started. Rachel?
Thank you so much, Bishop Rickel. On behalf of Circles of Color, we do thank you personally, as well as Alissa Newton and the staff at D House, for making this possible and inviting us to collaborate with you on the One Service. It's really been a privilege and a joy to do so. And I also want to join my thanks, our thanks to yours, Bishop, to Greg Hester, Josh Hornbeck, and April Caballero for their hard work on making this happen as well. And just very grateful to be able to share with the diocese. I'll introduce myself, Reverend Rachel Tabor Hamilton, Rector at Trinity, Everett. I am Shakan First Nations. My Shakani name is Jambahate. My Athabascan name is Kohojina. Thank you so much for having me with you on the panel today. So grateful to be here. I'd like to invite the Reverend Carla Robinson.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm the Reverend Carla Robinson. I am associate priest at Christ Church in Seattle's University District. I have the honor to serve there with two of my peers, Reverend Shelley Fayette as our rector, and Reverend Chris McPeak as our curate. And I would like to invite the Reverend Canon Jerry Shigaki.
I am the Reverend Canon Jerry Shigaki. I'm a retired priest. For 10 years, I was the Canon Missioner for Ethnic Ministries with the diocese. Presently, I'm doing some pastoral care at the Church of the Resurrection, and spending a whole lot of time with the various Circles of Color. It just seems like Rachel continues to have so many new and exciting ideas that we all are excited about and we want to implement. So I'd like to invite Ruth Ann.
Hi, I am the Reverend Ruth Ann Garcia. I'm really pleased to be here with you today. You'll hear some background noise, so I'm not going to talk too much, but it's lovely sandwich makers who are making sandwiches for Operation Night Watch, which is one thing we've been really proud to be able to provide for almost 2 years now. So we're really thankful for them. And I'm really thankful for the leadership. I'm fairly new to the diocese and just happened upon amazing colleagues and friends. So very glad to be here today. Thanks. I will call on Polly Shigaki, please.
Thanks, Ruth Ann. I'm Polly Shigaki. I'm the deacon at St. Peter's. My rector is currently on a sabbatical. This planning for this today was absolutely amazing, and I'm just glad to be part of this today. I'd like to invite Alan Hicks.
Thank you, Polly. My name is Alan Hicks. I attend Trinity Episcopal in Everett. I am Citizens Nation Potawatomi with a touch of Cherokee thrown in. I serve on the Indigenous Missioners Council of Advice, Brad Hoff. I work with that, and I'm leading a task force right now for the diocese on land acknowledgement. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm having a good time. This ought to be fun. Thank you. I don't know if there's anyone left to go to or not, but so.
Let me ask Rachel, did we get all the panelists, Rachel? I don't want to leave anyone out.
Thank you. Yes, we did, I believe.
Okay, great. Thank you all for doing that. And it's time for questions and answers. So please put those in Q&A, and we have people monitoring it. It's a little barren right now, so add something in there. And you can ask a question about this service today, about circles of color, about the issues of race. That's what we want to talk about. So we're open to your questions now.
And I would, thank you, Bishop. I would add too that one of our intentions around the service was to introduce members of the diocese who might be participating in the service to the diversity of our Indigenous ministries in the Episcopal Church that especially represent Province 8, the province that our diocese belongs to. So you saw representatives from Hawaii, you saw Indigenous people from Alaska, you saw people from Navajo land, and from Idaho, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming areas. So we tried to represent that diversity to you.
Great, thank you. We do have some Q&A coming in now. One was someone asking that Reverend Alissa, you didn't introduce yourself. So my apologies. I thought you did, but I'll let you do it again.
Well, you do hear me talk a lot, Bishop, so I'm sure it can be confusing.
It's nothing personal, I promise.
No, I'm the Reverend Canon Alissa Newton. I work for the Bishop's Office as the Canon for Leadership, for Congregational Development and Leadership Formation. I also serve St. Columba's Episcopal Church in Kent as their vicar. My ancestry is Northern European and immigrated to this continent in the mid-1600s. My role here is simply to be present. If there's something that Circles feels should be answered by a white person, I'm around, as is Bishop Rickel. It's a pleasure to be with you and to serve you.
Thank you, Alissa. Our first question, and I think Katya may be going to answer this. What does Turtle Island really mean?
Thank you. So prior to Indigenous contact, there was a different cosmology among the Indigenous peoples of North and South America. And what we generally refer to today among Indigenous communities as Turtle Island includes Canada, North America, Central and South Americas. So that whole group is considered Turtle Island for many Indigenous people.
Thank you. Next question is, how can individuals support needy BIPOC locally?
One of the things that I'm aware of that serves is the very important work that Sarah Monroe is doing in Aberdeen. The homeless shelter work that advocacy that she's doing and the different feeding programs and warming shelter programs directly affect Indigenous populations here as well as others. And I want to open that up and ask that question to any of the panelists if they also are aware of programs.
If I may, Carla, when I think of ministries that are happening, many of which are connected inside of our parishes, for example, Operation Night Watch reaches out and actually serves a number of communities, and a number of the groups that are in need happen to be individuals of color. So if your congregation is engaged or wants to be engaged in Operation Night Watch, that's another wonderful opportunity. While I had the chance to serve at Ascension, we worked with Mary's Place. Mary's Place did incredible work with all women, but again, because there is because poverty tends to affect in Seattle women of color and families of color, there was an opportunity there to do amazing work with those two in particular. So I would put those two as perhaps either operations that we've heard about or ministries that we may already know a little bit about.
St. Peter's also does that work with Operation Night Watch and Mary's Place, and Casa Latina is right in our neighborhood as well, along with Bailey Gatzert, which is the poorest school in the Seattle School District, which we support. Yeah, just continuing those work, the work that we do with those communities and offering a neighborhood food free pantry now.
So are there other panelists that want to answer?
Okay, so I wasn't sure if the question was for just ministries or if it's for supporting BIPOC folks in sort of in toto. If that's the case, one of the things I think that America is a great place for co-opting all sorts of things from other cultures. The Great Taco Tuesday and all these sorts of things that we see, or, people love fry bread or what have you. But really getting to know where in your neighborhood there may be actually BIPOC owned establishments is important. Often these are small mom and pop places that can definitely, first of all, that actually know how to make the food that you're craving for. And second of all, often don't have a big corporate background in sponsorship. So that's a great way to, within our communities, to look at that and support folks who really are the creative sort of forces behind arts and cuisine and all sorts of things like that.
Great, thank you. There are some great questions here. We're not going to be...
Bishop, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think Jerry Shigaki has a contribution.
All right, wonderful, awesome.
Thank you. At the Church of the Resurrection, we have a relationship with the Salvation Army. And also we give out Thanksgiving baskets, and we have relationships with local elementary schools. And I think what's important is the words of Carla in her sermon when she talked about compassionate wondering and the shootings of the 6 women in Atlanta. And after the shootings of the 6 women, I was just so pleased that a number of people either emailed me or called me and just asked me how things were doing, how am I doing, and that Asian hate crimes, it's real and it's there in our society. If I could just go off on a little tangent, I definitely appreciated the bishop's pastoral letter on gun control and Asian hate crimes, which is really important. And at the same time, though, Asian hate crimes is much more than addressing gun control issues. One of my friends who's Vietnamese, his aunt was walking toward going to work at Virginia Mason Hospital. And as she was going up Bourne Street, a person came down the street and started spitting on her. Another friend, Asian woman, she was at Costco, and we all know the various stations as far as free samples. And while she was in line to get a sample, a white woman was just berating and criticizing her as an Asian woman. We know that in the past year, there's been 3,800 cases reported cases of Asian hate crimes. And at the same time, there's hundreds and probably even thousands of Asian hate crimes that have not been reported. So I say that in that the various ministries and nonprofit organizations are important. And at the same time, it's important to develop personal relationships, develop trust with individuals of color.
Thank you. Anyone else? I want to, okay, good. Next question. What was your experience putting this service together? Is this your first time seeing the whole service? What are your thoughts and feelings about it?
I think I'd like to make a statement to that. We have had the opportunity in the past to have several services in which we have highlighted various experiences of communities of color. I'm thinking of many opportunities in which we gathered to celebrate particular feast days, be that Absam Jones, Imagabu, Lee Tamoy. I'm thinking of chances that we've had to do this in the past. However, this was a little different in that it was a diocesan service and it was video. So it was exceptionally moving for me to hear the music. I remember just honestly weeping at the hearing of the psalm of the day. That to me was a particularly powerful experience. It was also hard work because you never know how it's landing on people. You know, the thing about being in video is you're hoping that it's landing well and beautifully and wonderfully, and you know you're never quite sure because you're not seeing it. But man, after the experience was over, I wanted to have more. I was hungry for more. I'm hungry for more.
Yeah, I'd like to throw a comment in here. I wasn't all that involved putting the service together, but what I really appreciated was the fact that so many talented people were spotlighted. You're able to see the talents that are in the diocese and from people outside the diocese that we have access to that are really talented and need to be heard. We have such a diversity in the diocese, in the congregations, just in the land, and it needs to be celebrated and appreciated. And this kind of service does that. We're all children of God, and this emphasizes that to the world, and I appreciated that.
And we particularly wanted to highlight the youth of the diocese, right? They are our future, that the church depends on them. And as Carla said, if we don't get to the one flock and really be inclusive, the church is going to die. So I really hope that you enjoyed seeing those few youth that we could spotlight and their families in those prayers, those special prayers.
Yeah, Polly, thanks to you and all the contributors to those prayers. It was beautiful to watch. And I, in putting it together and inviting the different musicians, one of the things that I really just thoroughly was filled with joy to do was to be able to share with the diocese some of the experience of what it's like, the opportunity for Indigenous people, particularly to be able to share, our music heritage, our interpretation of and collaboration with the Western music that so much characterizes a great deal of the liturgy of the church, and show different ways that those can be combined in almost this dialogical musical process and be something quite beautiful and innovative. Also giving you a little window into Winter Talk. Winter Talk is a once a year gathering. This past year it happened virtually, but a once a year gathering of the Episcopal Indigenous peoples of the church. And that's the kind of music that we hear all the time in our services together. And Carla, thank you so much for your beautiful message and preaching, very powerful and meaningful.
Agreed. Thank you, Carla. There's many questions that are like this one. So we're going to cover quite a few of these, some version of this. Could you please explain what circles of color are and what is their mission?
I would like to invite Jerry to begin, and then I will say something after Jerry.
About 14, 15 months ago, Rachel and Joe Beecher and a couple other folks, we got together and we recognized that there was a lack of ethnic ministries in our diocese. And we just felt that it was important that we lift up the various ethnic groups in our diocese, and that there's so much that we could contribute to the overall whole of the community. And so what we've done is we've developed these circles. We have a African American circle, a Hispanic circle, a Native American circle, an Asian American circle, a circle of color, and also a clergy circle of color. And basically what we try to do is we support each other, and we have become a voice for the people of color in our diocese. We do a lot of celebrating. A couple of weeks ago, we had this liturgy of lament recognizing Asian hate crimes. The African American Circle is in the process of planning a Juneteenth celebration. There's going to be another liturgy of a lament for all people of color. And I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to interact and to celebrate and to worship with other folks of color. We also have a allied circle, which is very, very important and critical for us, in that we need committed Anglos, white people, so that we could walk together to make this diocese truly a multicultural diocese. Rachel?
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, the work of each of the circles is in great part this mutual support and hearing one another's stories in a way where it's immediately identifiable. And it's a safe place, a safe space to be able to share authentically of what we encounter in society or in the church. It's a confidential space. And it's also a space where, as a larger body, we can invite, dialogue and exchange with the bishop and the bishop's office and the important governance structures of the church and of our diocese, and just be able to, do and engage the important reparative work or innovative work, justice work that I think that the church says it's committed to. But as Carla pointed out in her sermon, it really does mean being in motion, being on the journey, being out in the wilderness, getting out of our pews and comfortable spaces and doing the journey with our neighbors in an engaged and intentional way. I wonder if there's anyone else on the panel who might speak to what Circles has been for you.
One of the things that has been powerful for me has been the chance to sit and, at least electronically, be face to face, and to have that opportunity to talk with not only my other siblings as people of color, but to talk with those who are in support and who are allied. As many of us know who are serving in parishes or have served, or understand that work can make you feel a little bit lonely sometimes. And experiences happen that you think are kind of only yours. And then you get the chance to sit with somebody and say, this happened to me, and to do some of that sharing, and even to then begin to do some strategizing and to say, well, hey, this is where I'd love for us to be. How might we get there together? So for me, it has been reviving. I think it has catapulted me back to some life that I don't think I had a year ago. It has really re-engaged me in terms of our work as a diocese. And it's been kind of like, it's been like a little bit of a sunrise for me that has helped me kind of stand up again where I wasn't feeling very helpful before. So to me, the circles has been critical to my personal spiritual health, as well as I think a revival in discovering my place vocationally in this church.
I'd like to comment. I was just going to say that I'm in my second year on the COM, and the circles have been become very critical after last year's convention in these resolutions and trying to implement them with intentionality of inviting and advocating for more folks of color to be part of the church, and as Carla's noted, be part of the genetic diversity that needs to happen in order for us to survive. So that I see part of my function within the circles that we are all gathering the information and trying to bring that so that as a body, the COM is able to advise the bishop and speak about that. And all of us are on a learning track as well to discover more about our own selves and our journeys about racism and systemic racism, and to really sit down and tell those stories to help each other.
I would say that I'm very grateful for our circles, because I would say that for many of us, telling our stories in the past has not been easy, because if we wanted to tell the story, usually what we would hear was that wasn't the case. So like I've been told many times that my experience is not it cannot happen. And I think that for some of us who've been here for several generations, we've like I am a, and I think I might have said this the last time, I'm exactly what happened with that whole melting pot idea. I am a second generation on one side of immigrants to the country. And then on the other, we've, an original Texan, but so much is lost for so many of us that my original Texan, which of course is indigenous, I have no idea what that is, because what I learned and what my grandparents learned was that they're supposed to, meld in. So having colleagues who have similar experiences is really important. And just sometimes, and I know all of us feel this way, whether, we're Anglo or we're people of color, that just having that friendship when you don't have to explain something really helps when we're really tired or we're carrying something. And so that's been such a great gift to me. There's a lot of wisdom in this room. There's a lot of people who've been in this diocese for a long time, and I'm really thankful for all the work they've done, and the really kind and lovely way that they've welcomed me to this diocese.
Thank you. I got very excited by what everyone's saying, because I wanted to come back to just highlight Jerry's group, he's the coordinator for Clergy of Color. And that also includes people of color who are maybe in discernment, or people who are in process formally. So, and there's the wisdom that Ruth Ann was talking about is just beautifully shown in the folks who are coming up or in discernment. And it's just a beautiful walk to do with them and be a part of the journey and the conversation with them as well. They're so freaking talented and it's beautiful. Jerry.
I feel that it's really a critical time in the life of the diocese, and that we're at a crossroads. In 2009, our average Sunday attendance was approximately 10,000 folks. Now in 2019, a couple of years ago, it was at 8,400 folks. So it's decreased about 15%. And what's important is that what we need to do is we need to work together, lifting up each of our cultures, and go out into the streets and develop relationships to share the love of God with our neighbor and recognizing, personal and cultural differences. So I'm encouraged with the circles of color, and that it could be one mechanism to evangelize and to invite people during this critical time.
Let me throw something in here real quick. I think one of the good things about the circles of color, the different circles, is that it focuses people in ideas. Before, you had a group here talking, or a group there talking, or one-on-one talking. Well, this focuses energies together to get things accomplished. You're able to bring a lot of ideas in on a problem or a situation or just different circumstances. It's a way to make things happen. They're action groups. You talk, you interact, you see a problem, you see an issue, and with any luck, you get resolution, or at least put on a path toward resolution instead of just talking about it. That's what these groups are for.
Okay, I don't see anybody else, so we'll go to the next question. There's some versions of this question throughout this list too, but I'll ask this one that's at the top. What can those of us in dominantly white congregations do to make our liturgy more welcoming to those descendants of those who were colonized by our European ancestors?
Well, that's a very important and highly contextualized situation and answer, right? Highly contextualized, depending on where your congregation may be located. I right now am on the Heritage Coastal Salish lands, speaking to you from Whidbey Island. And I know there's many congregations interested in doing land acknowledgement. And land acknowledgement can be very important for the awareness of a congregation collectively. And it's an important first step after that awareness towards developing a relationship, so that it moves from that head piece into the heart piece and creates transformative action. That's the ultimate goal. What is the impact of doing land acknowledgement, for example, on the congregation's transformation of heart to move toward relationship with the people around them? This also applies to our urban congregations. In the context there, the majority of Native and Indigenous people who've migrated to these lands are living in city environments and in Seattle. And places like the Daystar community, as well as Chief Seattle in Seattle, are really important places that parishes could connect to. So also finding out what are the most important social justice or environmental justice needs that your local tribal people are identifying. It could be in their journey toward federal recognition, which is extremely important. It could be in their struggles towards justice around the use of waterways or lands. So finding out what is most important for them and then becoming involved in those is very important to coming beside people. So welcoming people into the church liturgically is probably a 10th level concern, right? I mean, and I understand the question in terms of a desire to want to welcome people in, and that can be very important. Unfortunately, as it stands right now, the church doesn't have a lot of liturgical resources for doing that. And one of the things we've been mulling around about is creating, for example, a musical resource along the similar lines to Lift Every Voice and Sing, where there could be appropriate Indigenous and tribal music that any congregation could use. Because one of the big questions for everybody is it okay for us to use this, or is it cultural appropriation? So the only way to create things that can be more welcoming to Indigenous people is to collaborate with the Indigenous people we already have in developing the kinds of resources that would do exactly that. Otherwise, there is this sort of what we call, and in my Indigenous circles, pretendians, right? We don't want to get into pretendianness when we're trying to be welcoming. We need to go the other direction to really authenticity and inviting that collaboration with Indigenous peoples.
Let me talk here for a second. Like I said in my introduction, I'm leading the task force for the diocese on land acknowledgement. We've been meeting for months now, putting together a program, a project that will be on the diocesan website, hopefully within about a month, a little longer. What Rachel was saying is land acknowledgement is acknowledging that the land that you're building, your facilities, your physical plant sets on used to belong to Indigenous folks in the area. And what we want to do is acknowledge to that Indigenous group that we recognize the past. We can't change the past, but we recognize it. We want to establish a relationship with these folks. I've said this a lot of times in private meetings that we don't want this to be a little project where we can pat ourselves in the back and say what good people we are. No. This is establishing an honest relationship with folks and seeing if we can all move forward together. On our website where we get this put together, we're going to have resources, interactive maps. These interactive maps can basically show you the tribe that had the land that your building is occupied on. We'll have historical information, videos from the Doctrine of Discovery, which is very important stuff that everyone needs to know about. Suggested how-tos on how your church can get going on this project. It's taking the first step to establish a sacred relationship. That's what this whole thing about. It's, as Christians, as Episcopalians, it's our obligation to see the other person as a children of God. We're all the same human family. To treat every person with genuine love and to honor the dignity that every person and their ancestry deserve. That's what we want to do. I mean, one of our lines here is every encounter with every person is a sacred encounter because every person is a sacred vessel of God. A piece of God is in each and every one of us. That's what this is all about. So that's kind of where we're at. We're working on it. We'll have it up and running shortly. It's going to be fun. Whatever church your parish gets involved with it, it'll be a sacred journey. Enjoy it. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to say that as I kind of think about the African American communities that our churches are near, are in, are part of, there are longstanding liturgical tools. I think of Lift Every Voice and Sing is just one of the ones that's quickly at hand. And at the same time as I recommend this tool, I have to come back to our question of relationship, because it's great to use a wonderful tool like that, but it's the relationship with the folks that are there. So one of the things when I talk with congregations about this, I talk about speaking the language of the people. And what I mean by that is, what is it that's in the concern basket of the groups that you want to communicate with? So when I hear, when I'm hearing a church talk about social justice, I'm hearing a church talk about, we want to be engaged in just relationships with law enforcement. When I hear somebody say, we want to do something about systemic racism and how it produces and creates poverty. When I even hear those kind of things, my ears sort of perk up and I think, oh, okay, well, you're talking the language here. So, you know, and as you kind of move into a relationship where we can have that conversation, that's where I think that stuff becomes wonderful. And then suddenly you do have the opportunity to take that liturgical tool and actually connect it with the relationships that you're making. And then you kind of connect that heart and head, and opportunities for congregations to bloom can happen.
And some of our indigenous people are Spanish speakers. So they're representing the Parupacha, for example, among others. And so, you know, just kind of knowing who you have in the community around you, as well as what may be in your congregation, is another way of just knowing, showing that you're intentional, that you're aware, that you care about that, and you're making those yourselves vulnerable. Because one of the biggest things around Indigenous relationships and the church is 400 years of deep woundedness, genocide, hurt, and Christianity being weaponized to basically do the work of colonialism. So that willingness to do the work of going out the doors of the church and into the world and reality of Indigenous people, that's really the primary way of establishing a relationship that then they'll feel they can trust and be safe in partnering with you and in worshiping with you.
And I also think I concur exactly with what Rachel is saying. And I think that as Episcopalians, one of our things we love, and I'm a lifelong Episcopalian, so I would be definitely someone who I know oddly has done this, is that we just love our liturgy and our hymns and all of that so much. There's nothing wrong with that, except for when we think about the fact that our church is a product of empire, right? It is, and it is part of our history, very much as we're having to look at the police force and other structures in our communities for what they originally were, and why so often these problems continue to occur. So, you know, the division between churches in the North and the South, I mean, we have it there, right? And as I think, I don't remember which of my colleagues said this, but Christianity definitely has been weaponized. I know that Rachel said that. So, and Christianity has been used to take lands and all sorts of things. So when we are talking about our beautiful liturgies, they're using Lift Every Voice and Sing once a year on MLK, that's when it starts seeming like tokenism, right? Like, or choosing on, I don't know, Cinco de Mayo, that folks in Mexico don't even celebrate down there, but we want to drink a whole bunch of beer. Again, like, this is the sort of thing that is just, it's just silly, right? But when welcoming someone is being genuinely welcoming, right? And finding a space for that person and asking and having a conversation. Because again, assumptions are things that people love to do. As a person with a Spanish surname, 20 years into my ministry, the beginning of my ministry, people assumed I should do Hispanic ministry because I had a Spanish surname. I grew up in a 99.9% Anglo community. Would I have been or am I the best choice for the folks who might be there, right? So sometimes it's as simple as just being open to what people bring and meeting them where they're at, and then folks will tell you. So, when we had a Japanese exchange student when I was a little girl who I was in love with, his name was Katsuyuki Hamasaki. Our priest would just use a lot of incense because Katsuyuki used it. Now, he's still a Buddhist all these years later, of course, but that made him feel at home, and he was part of our family. And sometimes silly things like that feel really welcoming, and communities are very different. So what's going to be meaningful for one, Hispanic community may not be for another. So just taking the time to be curious.
One of the reasons we're doing this is to make people aware, to just open their eyes to things that are going on. For a lot of the dominant white culture, systematic racism is subtle, it's unrecognized. A lot of times they don't even know that it's happening. They're not even aware that they're a part of it, but it's hiding in plain sight. That's why we have circles of color. That's why we have services like we had today. It's awareness of making people see what's going on. It's through these overt actions that the marginalized can bring light into a dark world. That's why we're doing all this.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other panelists attempting to talk right now. So we have some really good questions here. And the first one is for the panel: what have you learned from the Episcopal Church's self-commissioned racial justice audit that was released recently? And what would you say is our growing edge as a diocese?
Well, that is a really quite interesting report. And even though it focuses on leadership and, if you will, the complexion of that leadership and the gender orientation and sexual orientation of that leadership, what it really does is signal back to that very beginning of leadership formation in the church, right? So where do we draw our leaders from, and why do we choose them, and how are we asking them to be educated? Because education equals enculturation. That is a direct equivalency. So the cautiousness and the mindfulness of what are we asking our leaders to become, and is there really space for their whole and authentic self in the church as leaders? So when we kind of look at this report, there's several patterns that have been identified. And one of those goes back to the leadership formation, which begins as us as lay people in the pews. And what are we experiencing? One of the things that can be most welcoming, referring to the other question also, is when someone in the pew sees someone at the altar that looks like them. There is nothing more welcoming and more profound than to see someone who looks like you behind that altar, as it is in politics, as it is in the world of business, being able to see you and imagine yourself into that role. And so part of it is that what our growing edges are, one of the things that interested me is that our diocese was not tapped as a leadership team to respond to that survey that went out. And so I will tell you that in the entire Episcopal Church, there are no Indigenous people in seminary from the United States. There are no Indigenous United States people in seminary. There are 2 people that are Indigenous that are currently going through ordination process in the entire Episcopal Church. Both of them are in our diocese. One of them is on this panel as Alan Hicks. Another is Darren Chittister at St. John's, Snohomish. So there's a real sense of pride that we can take, that we have these folks, and what do we need to do in standing committee and COM and our governing bodies and our education of these folks, whether local or sending them away, that genuinely welcomes the fullness of who they are so that they can become bishops and other things.
Thank you, Rachel. Are there others? I think you said Darren was St. John's, Snohomish. They won't like
I'm
him
so
in
sorry,
Olympia.
St. John's Olympia. My brain, sorry, I got all
That's all right.
excited there.
They'd probably love to have him as St.
They
John's,
would,
Snohomish.
but
I think
he's
they would. Anybody, yeah. That's
Thank you,
right.
Bishop.
Thank you. Thank you. Any others?
Jerry.
I'd like to add
Okay,
something.
Jerry. Yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
At convention, and after we passed the 6 resolutions, I think Bishop Rickel, you said it eloquently in one word, and that word was trust. What we need to do is we need to develop a trusting relationship between the communities of color, the circles of color, and the office of the bishop. And I look forward to that because we do need to work together and we need to be in relationship.
Thank you, Jerry. Others? Okay, I don't see anybody in that. Okay. Carla, this is kind of directed at you, but I really think it's a question for everybody. It says, Reverend Carla, thank you for sharing the lens of, quote, compassionate wondering. How can we, the church, wonder compassionately in the wake of the Derek Chauvin trial? What are we missing as a church?
I appreciate the question, and I know that there'll be others on the panel that will have insight, but I want to just briefly make a statement about what happened in our worship. And you might have been thinking, well, Carl, why didn't you say anything about that in your sermon? And I want you to know why. The biggest reason was we recorded this sermon before the verdicts were reached. And I was hoping to have the opportunity in this forum to speak briefly about it. Personally, I believe that those verdicts were fair and just. At the same time, I also realize that this is one case among very many throughout our entire country in which the same question is before us. And that is the question about law enforcement and the policing of Black bodies. You know, that is there, it continues to be there. It's encouraging to have these verdicts, and at the same time, we can identify at least 6 trials right now that are going on, same issue, police officer violence against Black people. So I want to say that that's there, and I'm thankful for those sets of verdicts, and yet I still see the challenge that's there for our church. Now, I do believe this is an opportunity for us as church to be engaged in the very thing that has to do with compassionate wondering, because part of it is to say, well, gosh, I wonder what is the impact of that kind of stuff on my friend Reverend Carla. How does she feel about that? Or, wow, there's my friend in the parish, and I know he's an African American man, and how might this be landing? So, I mean, there's an individual spot for that, and I also think that there is a communal or corporate spot for that. Hence, when events happen, it is important for our leadership to say, hey, what group is also being affected by this? And ask, say, all right, here I am. I don't know, I'm the convener of Province 8. And I see that a mass shooting has happened in Los Angeles. Part of what leadership does is reaches out and says, okay, hey, congregations that are there, folks that are there, what's going on? Can we talk? Can we be in some kind of communication? And so I'm thinking that being aware of specific events and being able to speak to those events, not only in our public statements, but in making the actual contacts, actually reaching out and making the ties. Those, I think, are wonderful opportunities for our church to grow. Creating those relationships and then having ourselves be in a place where, as those relationships and trust begin to build, and now you start talking about, finally, maybe somebody wants to step inside the building. And then we're talking about what might happen inside the building, because maybe a little bit of an opening has happened. So I know that's a long answer, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak to that. But that's kind of where I am today on that. And thanks for letting me put that on the table.
Yes, other panelists want to, it was directed at Carla, but it's kind of for everybody, but we can go to the next one if everybody's ready for that. Okay, next question. White colonial culture is based on a practice and social norm of pretense, curated emotions, contractual relationships. What is the experience of navigating or developing authentic transformative change when the opposite side of the table is living with social DNA that has a default that is somewhat of a cloaking device? How do emotional coding necessities hamper or help? You got that?
Yes, yes. There's so much to say about that. What an amazing question with awesome framing. The navigating that. So I identify myself as bicultural, and walking in two worlds and having to code switch between them. I will tell you that I do feel my most relaxed and authentic self when I am with my Indigenous peers, and that has to do with just, there's a way that feeds me. That feels very complete to me, and I feel so blessed by that opportunity. Why that's so precious to me is I represent the majority of Native Americans who are dislocated from where they actually have heritage lands. So I am not Indigenous person who's able to have being fed by my Indigenous community in a regular way. That becomes very important to have those circles of Indigenous people to be with. But navigating it and code switching into it, because part of what happens is also a power differential when it comes to the church. So for people of color in the church, there are some ways it can be said to be true that as a lay person in general, you have a little bit more safety net, if you will, or room to breathe, to offer a critique or to say, hey, something is wrong and needs to change in the dominant culture of church. And if you're a person of color and you're saying that by yourself, then you're going to get gaslit that that's not really true. We have really good intentions. Don't talk about racism that you're experiencing. Just kind of live with it, or you'll make a problem for yourself or for others. And it becomes all about protecting the institution and negating the authentic experience of the person of color. So that is probably the hardest thing to navigate. That one thing. Getting out on the streets, or kind of getting into the convention and making procedural organizational changes is a fairly that's like focusing on fixing a thing instead of really transforming a system. And transforming a system to me is, again, coming back to the relationships for truth telling, and asking our people. There are many clergy of color in the church at large. Even in the presiding bishop's office, who I would think have a lot of power, who do not feel safe to say to a bishop, the thing that's happening there is a wrong thing to be happening. It's a racist thing to be happening. Something needs to transform. They don't feel they can say that because they literally are told it's not their job. Right? So there are things to look at and fix at every level of the organization, so that when it comes to truth telling, the power differential preserves the safety of the speaker, or we will not transform the way we need to transform.
Again, I think that is so wisely said. And I think it's interesting to note too, that they're really, I think sometimes, especially, I'm being joined by a lovely colleague, so I'm going to put my mask on. Kelly Martin is on our vestry here, etc. She's a sandwich maker. But I would say that I think, sometimes people, if you want to change an environment or a system, it is on every level. Sometimes people will think that it's just like, oh, well, we'll go into easy sort of things that we think we should fix. But I've been thinking a lot about the many times I've heard in the church, for example, I'm talking about people. Can you guys understand me with my mask? I hope. People of color with time, for example. We have all of this is the way that it shows itself. So people will say about people of color, oh, well, I mean, if you would just show up on time, or every person of color is going to be late, or that's like, Mexican time or whatever. But again, that's often not true, first level. But secondly, if you think about people who have had people who had no say over their bodies for how many hundreds of years, what is the one thing you can do for people who are compelling you to work without wages, without any say in anything you can do? You cannot stop working, right? but you can slow the hell down. And that's just like, think about it. It's that, or we walk into a place where everything is totally based product driven, denigrating, you know, our experience or our community. And that's you know, we have this ability then to really slow it down, right? So it's community building over transactional things going on. And it's also the way that we can act with grace in a place that does not recognize it. And that seems so weird. People always love that time one. That's one nobody ever thinks about. And there's a lot of similar situations to that. So when we're being allies, it's not just like, I don't know, having the right terminology. Like now everybody says Latinx. A lot of Latina folks hate that, right? Like, and Latino folks hate that. It's not, you don't always have to be PC, but you want to just think carefully about things because they can be made into stereotypes. There's a lot of really on time people of color, and then there's, you know, some who aren't, just like with Anglo folk, right? So yeah, it's a profound shift, and really thinking about the causes of things sometimes that we don't even get. Even in the way that we speak about people's bodies and things like that, those have the way that we judge people on physicality and things like that, it really still is racially based, and we've been asked to change those things. So yeah, I mean, again, I think Reverend Carla said this throughout: relationship first. It's through relationship that you find out, and that you are willing to talk to folks about what it is that harms or that hurts, you know? And sometimes when we're in relationship with people, we can say, here's why this doesn't work for me, right? As a person of color, as women, for example, sometimes people will say things they think are nice, but we've been hypersexualized too early, etc. And so it's not. So anyway, that's a really, really long answer, and I'm really sorry it took that much time.
I was really, I just thought Rachel just was dead on when she was speaking about code switching as not only a tactic for survival, but as a way of speaking in systems that don't allow for the opening. I don't think of myself this way often, but when she said it, yeah, I'm bicultural. That doesn't feel that way, but yeah. And I know that there are times, especially when I'm interacting with either as a priest, you know, where I've got a title and a space and a function, I may look for opportunities because it may not always be something that's always there. And I'll look for a chance. You know, is there a moment that can be transformative? Is there a moment where we can move into a place that's not only safe for me, but safe for the other, to kind of say, all right, how do I want to say this? Because there's protecting that happens all over the place. I understand why I protect myself. I'm protecting myself against structures that have historically oppressed. And yet when I get into these moments where either I get people alone, or I get a small group of folks and we've had enough time together to develop some safety and some trust, then those are moments where I strike. I say, okay, here's a moment where you've stepped outside of what's safe for you. I've stepped outside of what's safe for me because we built some trust, and a moment could happen. That is not always easy. And I just want to include this as a moment that's harder. For example, when I, as a clergy person, am in conversation with a search committee, you know, so here we are as groups that have some very specific functions, and you know, I have to tread a little gently there, but I still look for the transformative moment, hoping that it will come. Sadly, many times it doesn't, but when it does come, for me, those become opportunities, or I feel some progress.
Okay, others? All right. Next question. I wonder if a part of this is learning our individual history. As mentioned by Reverend Ruth Ann Garcia, learning colonialism and then unlearning what we have known. This involves a breakdown of what we know and the chaos that can ensue from that. Is the church organization willing to break down and welcome some creative chaos towards building up of something new?
Well, that would mean having the institution be willing to let go a little bit of control to get to that creative place. It doesn't mean giving up agency. It does mean creating a space for that creativity. And that won't be constantly met with no. No is probably like the bullet to creativity. It's just how instead of that, it's what else? What else could we do? What else? To get to that, evoking that creative response that generally is informed by everyone at the circle, everyone who represents, the diocesan staff, everyone who represents our leadership, on and on and on. And just being able to get to something new. Sometimes getting that new place begins with looking like conflict. And we've seen that as a recipe time and again in the church in many ways. But what I'm most impressed with is the people who are willing to stay in the conflict long enough to push through it, to be honest about what was conflictual, and then push through it and do that together. Because those become the people who understand the method of transformation and become even more deeply dedicated to it. So getting beyond the part that feels like fear, and I think there's a lot of fear among those who have been privileged in our society and through the forces of colonialism, whether that's the white cisgendered male and things that support the institution that look like that and empower that the most. And so it does mean getting beyond our own defensiveness around that. And yes, studying the history that contributed to it. I've had many white people say to me that they're so jealous that people of color have culture because they don't have culture. So what I often invite them to do is to begin by reflecting that actually dominant culture is white culture. What does it look like? And how is it operant? And why is it the default against which all the rest of us are measured as being successful or not, as being worthy to hire as leaders or not? So getting into understanding who is the yardstick and why it matters, because that yardstick has been used to beat people with for centuries.
Okay, I feel like I need to respond here a little bit. Of the panel members, all are clergy except for me. And so I want to speak mainly from the perspective of the people sitting in the pews, the common folk, the rest of us. You're responsible for your own life. You have that responsibility to know your past, to know your ancestry, to know the culture that you grew up in, and to recognize in basic society the things that have gone on and happened. When I was a very, very young child in Oklahoma growing up, I'm of an age where I actually remember seeing down at the bus depot a sign saying a water fountain for colored only. I mean, I'm old enough, I remember that, I saw it, and it's burned into my head. That's part of my past. I don't know the people in the congregation, how old they are, but there is systemic racism that is passed along from generation to generation to generation. There might be beliefs that you have that you carry, you don't even realize that they're there. You might use phrases just in your everyday language, not realizing where they came from. If someone were gypped, you know where that phrase came from? From gypsies. This is the stuff that's in our society. So yeah, you do have a personal responsibility to examine who you are, to know what your beliefs actually are, to know how you became who you are, and to understand that you may be in a position where you can pass on these beliefs and unbeliefs to the next generation and the next generation on down the line. So yeah, in relation to the question that was asked, yeah, we do need to look at ourselves in honest eyes to see where we came from. So that's a lady point of view.
Thank you, Alan. One of the things that people noticed during the service, people's identification. We even had the bishop identify himself by how he would recognize his ethnicity or heritage, and Alissa Newton doing that. And recently in my congregation, we had a conversation on race. And each time we began, we would identify ourselves. So everyone in the room had to begin by identifying who they were by ethnicity or heritage. And, you know, even wearing that on the name badge, it's the awareness that, you know, we're coming at this actually quite fully, bring that to the forefront, be able to have these meaningful conversations around identity and culture change.
All right, thank you. We have 2 questions that are in the open questions, and we're going to try to wrap up with that. Although I will say that I'm willing to stay, and if the panelists are willing to stay, if other questions come in, we can forward on. But I think we had contracted with you for 2:00. Last time we did this, we went on for almost an hour past that. I'm not advocating it, but I also think it's a real important discussion and don't want to cap it. I don't want to be the one to make that decision. So I'm going to ask these 2 questions and we'll see where we are. The next question is to the clergy of color on this panel. What draws you to serving in our specific church? What message of hope and invitation do you have for people like me who wonder about what spiritual heritage to share with our children of color? And who wonder about what experiences and messages of God, community, and wealth they might grow up with based on this choice? Another light, question. It's a very good one.
Carla or Polly or Jerry, do you want to go first?
I'd like to take a run at that because I am not a cradle Episcopalian. I did not grow up with any experience of the Episcopal Church. So I didn't have friends who were Episcopalians or family members, so I really had no connection. What brought me to this church was the sense of it welcoming the full me, of being able to come into a place and be the full me. I have identified myself as an African-American woman. I am also a transgender woman. And so what brought me to this church was a place where I could actually be both and not have to leave one or the other outside in order to be here. What keeps me here is the way that we talk about incarnation and resurrection, the way we talk about those things and try to actually build them in the way that we worship and build them in the way that we serve as church. So it's that sense of, okay, our incarnation means God really loves this. God loves this. That sense of God loving me is what keeps me here and drives me to help this church live that as fully as is humanly possible.
Unlike Carla, I am a cradle Episcopalian. My mother went to a high school in Japan and attended an Anglican high school. And I was born right after my parents and my family came back from Minidoka after they were incarcerated for 3 years. And the church that I attended, St. Peter's, was my lifeline. It was right next door, and it not only provided me with spiritual nourishment, but social nourishment and community. I see St. Peter's, I see the Episcopal Church as my church, the church and the God that I love. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I continue to share the love of God. And if things are not quite right, I need to at least say, from my perspective, what is my truth? Because the church is important for me. And I think the church is important for all of us. And that's why we're here. And it's a matter of how are we able to listen to each of our stories so that we could grow, so we could transform, and so that we could just lift up our voices and truly say, we all are God's creature, because we all respect the dignity of every human being. And thanks be to God for the Episcopal Church, and thanks be to God that I'm a clergy person.
Just to say that I was sort of a social Buddhist, but married into the Shigaki family, and feel very grateful that that they are Anglican Episcopalians. So that I had to learn. I even had to learn that I'm beloved by God, because I didn't really know that, and I'm still working on that. And I guess I was willing to step into a role as to the diaconate, so that there is some modeling of that some child might see someone who looks like me at the altar. And the work that I do, is in the world is different to some degree than what priests do. And I don't have the guts or can speak as eloquently as Rachel, Carla, and Jerry, but I keep plodding on and willing to live in the tension of the both and that I have grown to love this church from knowing nothing about it when I basically started coming with a child, about 1970 to be fully involved, to learn about that, and that I, fully embrace that and want to continue that and welcome others into that realm.
Thank you. So we were right at 2:00, but I'm going to do this last question because I said we would, and we are going to let that be the last question. Rachel, before I do that, you or someone, is there a way people could send a question to the circles if they think of it later or didn't want to bring it up today or anything like that?
Yes, absolutely. If they wanted to send, they can send questions to Alissa or to you, and you can send them to me, or they can send them to me directly.
Very good. And we will do that. So I offer that to all of you that maybe didn't get to ask a question you wanted. Here's our last question to the panel. Does the diocese have a strategic plan for anti-racism and becoming more diverse and welcoming? And can you share some of the Circle of Color's dreams and imagination for becoming beloved community?
I'm going to actually ask the first part of that question of the bishop. Does the diocese have a strategic plan for diversity? And then I'll get to the second part.
I knew that was my answer, but I didn't want to step on you. And Alissa can chime in too. I would say the way I would answer that now is we did have a strategic plan. We believe we have a strategic plan, but we're totally revising that in light of the realization and learning from our past mistakes, and also the knowledge and wisdom from this group, the Circles of Color. So we're trying to work together now to develop that. So I would say we don't have one yet that we would say, yes, that's absolutely it. But I would say there's a strong, and I'm honestly going to say there always has been, even if we disagreed about which direction, there's always been a strong feeling in this diocese for us to have that. And so I would say at this moment, it's in development. That's my, Alissa, you can add to that if you want to, but.
I will choose not to contradict anything you've said, Bishop, but I will tell you what some of our strategies, they might not all come together for a plan, are. First strategy is to listen better to our people of color. And this is what we are trying to do here as a bishop's office. It is to do better than we have done in the past in terms of being in relationship, listening well, and understanding. And as a part of that, you have, I hope, and you will hear us apologize for when we realize we've done wrong. And we will not issue an apology until we are also able to articulate how we will do better. So there's a few things we're in conversation with circles right now about figuring out how to do better. And they're incredibly gracious with us as a bishop's office. And so keep your eye out for an apology or two that will be coming out. So that's our first strategy. Our second strategy is to work with our white folk who are still in process about this, who are struggling to understand some of the dynamics. If you're a white person who feels a little defensive about some of this, who doesn't understand all of the language we're using, or who feels a little hurt or upset or left out by it, we want to help you learn. And we want to help our white folk who aren't ready for some of these conversations to get ready to have the conversations. And we have several strategies and tools in place. If you're one of those white folk, come talk to me. I've been one of those white folk before, and I'm always learning and working and making mistakes and apologizing. That's how we learn. So those are the two main strategies. There's truth telling coming up. There's other things in the future as we figure out how to do better.
Thank you, Alissa. I'm a white person. I can't help it, but I am in that position too, learning, and also more than willing to talk to anybody who wants to about that part of this. I think I just would add, basically, at this point, everything is on the table, and my hope would be that you see changes, big and small, that will help that become a more easily answered question. So I will turn it over now back to the panel to answer that second part, the dreams of Circle of Color, imagination for the future.
Yeah, I have a lot of dreams about our Diocese of Olympia. I have a dream that one day we would have a sufficient number of clergy at the altar so that a Hispanic boy or an Asian girl or an African-American guy could look up to the altar and see his or her face. I have a dream that one day soon, that we will have an African-American priest as a rector or a vicar. I have a dream that the office of the bishop will reflect the diversity of our community and of our diocese. I have a dream that the diocese can make a commitment for various ethnic ministries. For example, with Hispanic ministry, it's virtually impossible to develop a long-term, a short-term strategy for Hispanic ministry to survive in 2 or 3 years. So my dream is that in 5 years or 10 years, we could develop such a strategy so that we could see Hispanic ministry flourish. Because as we all know, there's just so many Hispanics working in the fields or in service jobs and as professionals throughout the diversity, throughout the diocese. And my last dream is, how can we develop relationships? How can we respect each other and develop relationships as we share from the heart, not from the mind, not only intellectually. So I'm here, the Circles of Color are here, and we would like to walk with the powers to be.
Thank you, Jerry. I want to lift up something too the bishop said that I think is really important. You mentioned, Bishop, about how if there's been a commitment in the diocese has a commitment to ethnic ministries, and it's how is that done that we might disagree about. And I think those points of disagreement for me are also touch on that distinction that we talk about in anti-racism, which is between intent and impact. And so talking about, what is the intention might have been very good, and what's the impact of it. And so getting to that dialogical space of talking about, what would have that impact, that then also understands and appreciates the organization of the church. And that's where, as a bicultural person, I find myself valuing both. I have an investment in the organization, and I have an investment in the creativity and the creating space for that. And so how does that walk look like? Because if one foot moves forward and the other's stuck in the mud behind, we don't get far. So it's just, how do we have 2 feet, 2 legs moving so that everything is moving forward? And that's actually really a pleasant goal. How do we get to be a church moving forward together? So the dreams that I think that we've also talked about in circles when we've had we had a virtual retreat, also touched on the model that's been generated in the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Reconciliation in Atlanta, and wanting to have a racial reconciliation center on the West Coast. And we've kind of dropped it into the bishop's ear that is really a wonderful goal and a dream that we have in creating that here. So that, and we're already looking at what resources to get for anyone who are interested to know. Sometimes people will ask for bibliographies. We're in the process of providing bibliographies to Sue Tate at the Diocesan Resource Center, so that you can go one-stop shopping for a lot of our different community concerns and needs and histories at our Diocesan Resource Center, with the idea that this is a stepping stone into creating a dedicated center or set of resources for racial reconciliation and education. Another thing I would point out as a resource is the Paths to Understanding, is an organization here in Western Washington that works on ecumenical and racial reconciliation and relationships. Paths to Understanding has piloted recently allies, becoming better allies. And they piloted it with our Allies Circle. And now it's an 8-part course that you can do online virtually together, is with Paths to Understanding ally formation.
All right, any others? I'm going to, in just a minute, ask Rachel to pray us out, or to call on somebody to pray us out on this panel. I want to thank our panel especially, but all the circles of color, because they did a lot of work behind the scenes, people that you don't see today, that still did a lot of work to make the day possible. So we want to thank them. Carla specifically for her sermon, and for preaching for us today, and for her wisdom as always. And for all the people who we talked about in the beginning who made this happen, and most especially all of you that have been with us today and been part of this conversation. The key here is to never, we couldn't do it all today. We're not going to do it all tomorrow, but we've got to keep doing it every day, and we got to keep working on it and having these conversations. So thank you for being part of those. And Rachel, would you pray us out of here today?
Thank you, Bishop. On behalf of Circles of Color, I do want to thank Bishop Rickel and Alissa Newton and the diocesan staff, and not only for this event, but for the dedication that we do see and the work that is being done on implementing both the directives of the resolutions and on truly wanting to establish, partnerships and relationships. So thank you for the work that you're doing. That's both personal work to you and also organizational and relational work. Thank you very much. So let us pray. Gracious Creator, you have made all creation and called it good. In your diversity, you celebrated, and the Holy Spirit took delight in all that you had made. And Christ gifted that Holy Spirit to each of us in our diversity to speak from what you made, uniquely who we are. and to share that diversity that, while perhaps confusing and chaotic, ultimately can bring us the gift of one another, the relationship that is the kingdom of our Creator. We ask your blessing upon all of us for the courage and strength and voice to live deeply into the beauty that you invite us to be, that we need to be together. In Christ's name we give thanks and pray. Amen.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good Sunday, a good rest of the week. And we will be together again like this at some point. We don't know when. Many of you said, let's do it again. And we'll plan on that. If the panelists will stay around, I know we want to debrief a little bit, but the rest of you, thank you for being here today, and blessings to all of you.